Good evening, Sir Dennis. When you have the podium and they have the mic, you could call the judges by their first name. So good evening, Roxanne. Good evening, Joanne. Good evening, Simone. Good evening, and it's only bad memory here, Justice Crocious. Good evening, Banks. Good evening, Frank. And you know I can get locked up just like how the lawyer get locked up. I hope it's a little shorter than the one get locked up by the magistrate the other day. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join us here on this very special occasion, particularly on the day on which the firm was started back in 1972. It was a Saturday evening. I'm not sure if Ralph was at that cocktail. It was upstairs in the building in front, and it was a particularly special occasion. I'm not going to talk about the history because my father, I know if I said to him, Dad, I really got to say thank you to you because this building has not only educated me, it sent me to school overseas, it sent my siblings to school. It literally has fed me, my family, my siblings' family, and you really couldn't ask for a better start. But that was typical of that generation. So if I said that to him, and if you have a chance to look at the book, there's actually an article in the book on the ghost of Hatfield Chambers. There actually are two ghosts there now. There used to be one, Mr. Dummett. He's an exceedingly friendly ghost. He would open and close doors. Raquel, who you just saw one night, was on the ground floor where the accounting office is, and the doors upstairs were opening and closing. Needless to say, the bank balance the next day went into red. She fled the building because Mr. Dummett was around. He was joined about 5 years ago by Clarence, and I have conversations with him. So I said to him, I said, look, Dad, I really want to pay a tribute to you. And I never forget what he said before he passed, when he started to feel not himself and fell ill. He said, let me tell you something, and he's very strong-willed. I don't want you spending any money on doctors and hospitals for me. Take the money and give it to the next generation. And that was his mantra. It was always for the future. Now, in 1972, Guyana was a bit positioned as like where it is today. We had two bumper crops in 72, and I believe the first crop in 73 was a bumper crop. So the country was doing well, the balance of payments were doing well, and then the Arabs went to war with the Israelis, and the Americans backed the Israelis. OPEC came, price went through the roof, and since then we have been a struggling country until we discovered oil in 2015. So 50 years later, we are perhaps economically at the best place we have ever been in the history of the country. I understand our own self-created difficulties, but we are at the blessed place. And so when Andrew and I sit down, especially Stephen and I sit down, and we start to look at what is the legal profession going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years, and what are we going to invest in, it always comes back to one thing, which is the human talent. In this profession, it's the human talent in which you have to invest. Before I go on, I do have to give a shout out to the present chancellor who's not here and the Chief Justice. When I started to practice, the forecourt of the Supreme Court was a dumping ground for all forms of trash, vehicles that had been levied upon that had never been sold. It was an awful place. The restrooms were not sanitary. As a matter of fact, when I came into practice and I just come back, I thought could not be the way I'd want to spend the rest of my life. What I do want to say, and I say this, I believe without fear of contradiction, the physical premises of the Supreme Court has never, ever in its history looked better. Never. Some may argue that may not be the best allocation of resources. I beg to differ. If your work environment is not good, then it's difficult to inspire persons to do better. Before I continue with the story, I want to shout out again, and I'm not trying to curry favor because I don't get it. The judiciary is carrying a burden in terms of the number of cases it has now, more than it has ever carried before, and it is delivering, I believe, at a level that is unprecedented. So I do want to acknowledge that is the current state of affairs. Now I come back to where we are and what the legal profession will look like. But before we can talk about the future of the legal profession, we have to look at the future of the country. I know I'm not about to give a political speech, but I will say, if we who are sharing this space and time today, collectively in this country we call Guyana, cannot take advantage of what is the best time in the history of this country economically, then the next generation will condemn us forever. We have had the best good fortune this country has had for a long time with the discovery of oil. I hope that our leaders will find the way in which to make sure we take advantage of this to the benefit of all the citizens. Because if we can't manage this, then we might as well pack up and go home. And talking about going home, after about 3-4 years, back in the late 70s when the country started to experience some difficulties, a lot of people started to flee Guyana. People migrated. The skills that sit here would have been migrating out of Guyana. As a matter of fact, the Catholic Standard used to run a record every weekend of who had migrated. And the country went through that difficulty. And I remember on several occasions, myself, sometimes my sister would say to my father, "When we going?" And he would always, those of you who know who Clarence, you know that he tends to speak properly. But he would revert to Pluto Shervington. And he would say, "I born ya, I grow ya, I can't even remember the next line. No, before we got me leave, it says, "I born ya, I grow ya, I work ya, my belly full ya. I ain't leaving Guyana." And I thank him for that decision, because despite the political and other climate that existed at the time, he persevered, and he was able to leave us, Andrew, myself, all the rest, a platform. The future of the legal profession, particularly for Guyanese, and I do want to urge all my colleagues here, that before we might have perceived the competition as the competition between us individually or between firms, we need to wake up and smell the coffee. The competition for the provision of legal services in Guyana will not come from Guyanese. It will come from large international firms that will come into the country and take the real work, the real substantial work that exists. And if we, the practitioners, don't see that happening and start to either combine or form larger legal firms, we are going to get pushed to the edges like so many other countries where we are not going to be able to take advantage of this. So the obvious question is, how do you do the migration from practicing in a local jurisdiction where, you do commercial work, pretty standard stuff, we're not even on the map for arbitration. How do you migrate from that to provide global international legal services? We have chosen one method. There are several paths, I am sure. We, about 4 or 5 years ago, decided that we would collaborate with top flight US firms in which we would send some of our associates out to those firms for a year as a result of a joint venture partnership, and they will sit in the commercial offices of one of the top flight firms for a year. And when they come back, of course, you see the product has changed. You get a classic A1 lawyer. We started that with Sherman & Sterling. I think it was back in 2018. Mr. Stephen Roberts left, young associate. He had just left the Attorney General's chambers. He fled the Attorney General's chambers. He didn't have the best and most cordial of relationships. He came, took him on. We have a good friend in Sherman & Sterling, and she said, "Stephen, we have an exchange program. You can come up." Stephen went to Sherman & Sterling in New York for a year. I wouldn't tell you what he did with his nights, but certainly what he did with his long hours, and I was happy he went, because before he would go home at 5, when he got to Sherman & Sterling, he realized that 15 hours was not an excessive amount of hours to put in per day. And came back, and I'm very happy to say 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, Stephen made partner at the firm. I want to put my hands together for Stephen Roberts. Tonight, I'm going to announce for the first time, of course, the largest thing in town is going to be Exxon for several years. This is how Booker's was for a while. As a result of a collaboration between ourselves and Exxon and one of the world's largest law firms, White & Case, 2 of our associates have just won a fellowship to spend 9 months with White & Case in the United States of America. And then they go on to spend another 3 months, I think it is, with Exxon in Exxon's head office in America. And when they come back, I have no doubt they will follow a similar path to Stephen. I'd like to commend those two persons who were selected. Exxon conducted the interviews, White and Case conducted the interviews. We had absolutely no input on that. If you could put your hands together for Ashley Henry. And Ashley, are you here? If you are here, you can stand up, please. And the second associate, she used to be with the Attorney General's chambers, had some difficulties with the person who held the office, went to Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But one of her last cases she did before, she did against me before Roxanne, sorry, Chief Justice George Wiltshire. And she was extremely impressive. And I thought, you know, one day I hope to hire this girl. And it turned out a year and a half ago, no, not even a year and a half ago, less than a year ago, I saw her and she, you know, things had changed and she accepted the offer to come. And she's been with us about 9 months. I had to push this lady to go to the interview. I had to beg her to go to the interview. Went, impressed Exxon, impressed White and Case. Please put your hands together for Anika Archer. And so, before I close, what are the big areas going forward? The big areas, from the way we see it, litigation, I think, is going to become, well, before we do that. COVID was bad, but I think COVID is the best thing that happened to lawyers. Imagine appearing before the Chief Justice sitting on a beach in Barbados, and you put up the backdrop with some books in a library, and you say, Your Honor, can I have an adjournment? Life is really hard. I mean, you couldn't do that before. Because if you went before Roxanne, well, actually, if you went before Justice Ramlal and you were female and your collarbones were outside, you know you were going to get locked up, right? So, with the advent of COVID, I think several things have happened. I hope we don't ever go back to the mandatory trials, other than, of course, I suppose, criminal trials. It is now, it's a lot more efficient for clients. It's a lot more efficient for witnesses. They don't have to travel to Guyana. Once the internet is good, you can actually deliver better service. So I hope one of the benefits of COVID, if one can use that term, is of course the fact that we have now migrated to virtual appearances. I'm not saying that justice has become virtual. I'm just saying the appearances have become virtual. So, may become elusive. But the future for Guyana, and I urge all my colleagues who are here, because everybody here who practices is a friend of mine, whether you're related to me, like my blood brother Stephen, whether you're like Roger, Mark, any of the colleagues here. We have to look very carefully at where the future lies. The future is going to be in cyber. A lot of stuff is going to be happening in cyber law. In Guyana, with the developments in the oil and gas industry, arbitrations are definitely going to become an essential place. I'm happy that Sir Dennis is giving a feature address tonight, because he has been one of the drivers for making the Caribbean, not Guyana, we don't want to be patriotic about this, but making the Caribbean the center for arbitration, where we have experts. We have experts like Sir Dennis, who retired from the presidency of the court, has immeasurable skill internationally, and is available as either an arbitrator or an expert. And I'm happy that we have reached the stage now in the Caribbean where we have more confidence in ourselves. Before, there used to be a lot of hesitancy about the CCJ and whether we like the decisions, don't like the decisions. As a Guyanese, it's the best thing that has happened to us at the Apex Court. We have got more confidence in ourselves, and therefore we have to develop our own jurisprudence going forward. And so I want to urge the young lawyers that you need, of course, apart from arbitration, apart from making the Caribbean a center for arbitration, Guyana is going to be the lead. I hope we realize that. Negotiations, your skills in negotiations are never going to be more wanted than they are now. and again, forgive me for repeating it, the foreign competition is going to be here because the world is going to become very flat. And in that flat world, it's not going to be whether or not you get local content so that you have an advantage that may not necessarily be matched by your skills. Your skills will have to be as good as and better than the rest of the world. And that, I think, is where the target should be. The final word on, I think, what has probably been the best development in the legal profession over the last 20 years is that, as you know, when Hughes, Fees, and Stoby started, there were 3 men. They then added 3 more men. Elizabeth came, and then she left because they probably had too many men. And now, I'm very, very happy to say that over 68% of the practicing lawyers in Hughes, Fields, and Stoby are women. It is, and that's on merit. And I believe the same perhaps is reflected in the judiciary, maybe not as high in terms of numbers. And that is certainly in our modeling going forward. I don't see that trend changing in the next 6 to 10 years. And I think it's an excellent trend. For some reason, the data tends to suggest that women are a lot more dedicated. But you're not here to hear me ramble on about the profession. I just want to say, take an opportunity to thank those persons here who've been with the firm over the years. I see Johnny Carpenter bending his head. Johnny's father and my father were good friends. Johnny followed my dad as chairman of Hand in Hand. Tony and Claire, thank you very much for being here. It really has been an excellent journey. I think we are particularly blessed to be here. Jimmy Foster over to the corner there, knew him since he was 4 years old, used to live up the street. And so it is our pleasure, on behalf of Hughes, Fees, and Stoby, before the vote of thanks, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us on this very, very special occasion. And you look fabulous. Thank you very much. You should all have before you a champagne glass that's filled with champagne. And I just want to make sure I get mine so I can propose a toast. I see some empty glasses over here. Johnny, I know you can't put White Horse in a champagne glass, but you could. While I'm waiting for my glass, I completely slipped me to mention perhaps the most critical part of Hughes, Fees, and Stoby, and that's the community. When we started, you would have heard some entertainment coming from down the street. That's because one of our long-standing residents died, and the funeral was this afternoon. So the post-funeral soiree is there. We had to negotiate a silence for a while. But the one dream I have, well, I have several dreams, but one of the dreams I have is we have actually started a school in the neighborhood because this neighborhood has been absolutely fabulous to Hughes, Fees, and Stoby. Everybody thinks they call it the ghetto, it's cross street and what have you. Thank you. And we started a project about 2 years ago in which we fund a school at the end that's in the Mildred Mansfield Club because we discovered during COVID that none of the children who went to any of the schools in this neighborhood got any form of education once COVID came. And that's a frightening prospect because you know if you miss 3 months, the impact it has in your education if you're at one of the best schools in the country. So imagine what happened. So we started the school down the street. We funded, and one of the goals for Hughes, Fees, and Stoby is that we will actually be able to sponsor a child literally from kindergarten all the way through law school. We're working on that. It's going to get there, but I think as the country goes forward and enjoys better economic prospects, we really need to become our brother's keepers, and that is important for us, and we continue to engage in the community. And the last shout out I want to, and I know Laura is here, is the indigenous community in Guyana has always been close to us. We continue to give pro bono services to them throughout the country. Laura, it is an absolute privilege to work with the APA, the Amerindian Peoples Association, and we have dedicated the Clarence Hughes Scholarship to any indigenous person who wants to study law. I know she's going to be embarrassed, but I'm going to ask Paula Gomes to stand because Paula Gomes successfully completed her first degree. She was the first recipient of the Clarence Hughes Scholarship, and I know I'll get slaughtered on Monday for this. So I was talking about talent, and we managed to hire two Guyanese who topped the law school in Hughes this year, who have joined us. One of them, actually, we were lucky enough to be able to sponsor him through first degree. He topped the first degree. Matter of fact, let me just go back. He topped the country in Cape, he topped the Caribbean in Cape, then went on and topped UG in the first degree, and just ended up topping Hughes Law School with another Guyanese, both of whom we've managed to snag. So Sean Siran is exceptional. Please stand up, Sean, wherever you are. He literally has been topping. There you go. This man has topped CXC, Cape, UG, Hughes, and the other colleague, the other Guyanese, who topped Hughes this year. Really proud of him, Michael Jagnanan. Both of them have been children of HFS because Michael came since he was in sixth form, and Sean came just as he finished sixth form. That's the end of me. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't even started drinking this. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please raise your glasses to the future of Guyana, first of all. May we all have a great future. Cheers. And to the future of Hughes, Fields, and Stoby. Here, here. And before he comes up, I want personally, on behalf of the firm, to thank our featured speaker tonight. Those of you who've appeared before him at the CCG know that he is a most rigorous intellectual judge. He has been exceptional in his period of stewardship of the Caribbean Court of Justice. And I called him up about 4 months ago and said, Sir Dennis, we're going to be celebrating 50 years this year. I'm begging you, please, please come. He accepted immediately. And then when they announced that the CPL finals would be tonight, there was a period when the guest list and the RSVP started to look very low, and that was before the last match Guyana played. You would be happy to know halfway through the match, Andrew called Kathy, my wife, and said, you better revise the guest list. Guyana sadly exited, but I am happy this evening and honored. I don't get to do the vote of thanks, but honored to have Sir Dennis Byron with us. Could you please raise your glasses to the Right Honorable Sir Dennis Byron? Thank you very much. Final time, I gone.